Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Have you ever felt like you're being forced to be somebody that you're not? That maybe you've been lied to all your life? That maybe you've been pushed down from who you really are, being forced to not be your authentic self, and instead been forced to conform, and been told that there was something wrong with you. And this has been my experience. And I am not a conspiracy theorist. I'm like far from it. I'm usually the person arguing with the conspiracy theorists. However, I just recently, the more I went digging, the more I started to see just how deep this went, how deep this narrative went. And so I just like share my experience. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but I suppose that some of you can. So if you can, well, how would you know if you can? But keep listening and find out. But as a kid, it was always a bit different. I thought a bit differently. On the Myers-Briggs personality test, I come out as an INTJ, which is fairly rare, and we tend to have a different way of thinking. And, I could see a lot of things around me. I was a fairly bright kid. I couldn't tell you exactly what my IQ was, but I know I was put in the talented and gifted program because they weren't sure what to do with me. But I had this wide range of interests. And I wanted to know, the things I was interested in, I really wanted to know about deeply. As a kid, I was, kind of had this idea that I had to do a trick. I had to be smart in order to keep the adults around me happy. And it was one of the only things that I could really do to gain approval. And without going too much into my past, my parents weren't, terrible, but they weren't awesome. And so very often, the environment I grew up in was a bit tumultuous, and you weren't really sure from one moment to another whether people are going to be safe or not safe. You never knew if you're going to be accepted or not accepted. So my insecurity started there, but it carried over into school. By the time I went into public school, the other children were different. I didn't quite fit in. The things I was interested in, they weren't interested in. The things they were interested in, for the most part, made no sense to me. And the teachers weren't quite sure what to do with me either. And so I went through that entire school system. But it was one of those things, I wasn't aware just how deep this rabbit hole went. The whole idea that in around 1830, Horace Mann brought back this Prussian education system to the United States, and specifically because it was very good at churning out obedient workers and obedient citizens. You're hearing this idea that the reason that we're going to the schools and being taught this way and have all these standards is because we're supposed to be good workers. Realizing that I've been to a factory that was supposed to produce me, make me into a good worker, and that everybody around me has gone through that same factory, that's one of those things that really shakes you to your core when you really start to see just what's going on. And once again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but here I am seeing this programming, because we get programmed, as children by all kinds of different sources, by our parents, by our peers, by our schools, by all the interactions that we have with other people, the pressures of the society upon us. And the pressure upon me over and over again was to conform and to fit in, and I realized I didn't. I couldn't do what they wanted. It never felt right to do what they wanted. It never felt natural to do what they wanted. And no, I don't mean I didn't get a job and all those kind of things. I went in and I fit into society and did all the little cookie cutter things I was supposed to do. And this is not an anti-work and I'm just going to be an anarchist kind of thing. It was just I didn't seem to fit. And I worked for government for a long, long time. And I worked for some corporations, and over and over again, I was kind of branded as a maverick. And a lot of this was because I could see things differently. I said, well, hey, this right here, why are we doing it this way? Or a lot of times they wouldn't explain to me why things were being done. Just do it this way. And it became very, very difficult over time to really reconcile why aren't people at least considering some of the observations I have. And most of the things that I did, most of the things I was interested in, outside of that, I had very few peers. People I had very few people to actually talk to about my various interests, other than maybe, a cursory, well, that's nice. But very often I found that people didn't understand or didn't share those same passions. And, I was forced to, the most comfortable thing to do was to be a chameleon and to behave like the other people around me and to talk about the things they talked about and to talk about the mundane subjects they talked about. And to just conform, not to do anything different. And I got that programming from a lot of different places that I couldn't do things, that I wasn't capable, that I wasn't good enough, that I shouldn't try all these other things that I was interested in and wanted to do. I should simply just conform and do what I was told and fit in my little box. And that became more and more evident or painful later on in life when I had to start searching for different jobs after a very long state career, and finding that the prerequisite to get a lot of different jobs and to start into a lot of different careers, which I could pick up in probably a week, to be honest with you, so maybe a little bit longer, required this massive amount of education, at least a 4-year college degree and with a focus in a particular subject, to be able to even get an entry-level position doing. And and I'm certainly not belittling or saying no, there aren't positions which require quite a bit of education and skill prior to taking that position. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about being that specialized. I'm talking about jobs that, most jobs I've had, I've generally had the experience that, if you give me a couple weeks, I can learn it. And I can figure out what we're doing here. And within a few months, I can really figure it out to a much deeper level, usually. But being kind of like forced to stay in a lane, and in this case, not having gone to college, having gotten this, state career right out of high school, because once again, I didn't get the, a good friend told me that the educational system had failed me, and failed to pick up on my interest, failed to pick up on the direction I could go in. I had to very often just wait for everybody else to catch up. And the teachers were forced to, I think I met with a guidance counselor once, and they told me I shouldn't wear ripped jeans. That was about it. And I didn't, my parents were busy doing their thing. I didn't get any guidance to go into college, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But I found that, I was forced into this world of you have to go work these meaningless, more menial jobs because you don't have this particular type of education. And, that's kind of a tangent. But, in various ways, I feel like maybe you have been conditioned by society. Just be obedient. Just do this thing. Just accept your role. Just, be a cog in this particular machine. And, if you do that, it will serve the greater whole, which isn't everybody else necessarily. It's the people that really benefit from the labor of a lot of people. It's a smaller group of people. It's not just them and that programming. It's also just society as a whole. And I don't mean that in a, once again, conspiracy theorist way, but people are doing the comfortable thing. And it's very, very difficult to go against that grain. It's easy for a lot of people to say, well, you just have to be, be yourself and push against these other people and don't care about what other people think. And I'm sure some people are wired that way. But evolutionary psychology teaches us very differently. We're social creatures, and we're social creatures because the relatives of our ancestors who didn't really care what the other members of their group thought tended to die and not produce as many offspring. If you look at our closest relatives, like the chimpanzees, when individuals break off from the main group, they're generally hunted down and killed, or they're simply not able to survive without the entire group. So there is a very strong hardwired instinct to be accepted, to not do things differently, because once you start to face disapproval from the group, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good because somewhere back there in our more primitive brain, we get the danger signals. This is not a good thing. So I've experienced that throughout my life. At this point, at the ripe old age of 56, almost 57, something seems to have snapped, and I've decided, well, I'm not going to take this crap anymore. And so I'm scared and nervous and unsure, but I'm looking more towards, well, I'm going to be more authentic, whatever that actually means. I've had things leading up to this, but it seems to have reached a tipping point. I don't know if that's happened for you or whether you wish it would happen for you. I don't know if any of this has made any sense, but let me know if it's made some sense. And, play bass guitar and play RPGs. Life is okay, kids. It's not all terrible. But these are just some of the things that are rattling around in my head lately. You know what I mean?